All right, so today we're going to look at determining if lines are parallel or not using our converse theorems. These are going to be some quick practice problems for us to review. All right, so let's recap real quick. So the ways to justify parallel lines, we're going to use the converse of alternate interior angles, converse of alternate exterior angles, converse of corresponding angles, converse of same-side interior angles, also known as SSI, and some people like to call it consecutive interior angles. All right, so the first one, you have 30 seconds. Determine if these two lines are parallel or not. So you want to look at the angle relationships, see if it fits the definition of any relationship we can use to determine if those lines are parallel. All right, in this case, it's a yes by alternate exterior angle converse. We have our two curve markings to show that our angles are congruent and they fit the definition of alternate exterior, making the two lines parallel. Next example. So again, we're trying to look at that angle relationship presented to us. Does it fit one of those definitions to be able to use the converse? All right, so right away you could see that we have two angles in the interior, 180. They look like they're alternating interior angles. However, they do not match. Alternating interior angles need to be congruent. So our lines are not parallel. They fail that definition of alternate interior angles. All right, next one. So again, we're looking at that diagram, looking at our curve markings and the information provided. And here you should see those two curve markings mean something special. In this case, the angles are not congruent. They look like they're corresponding. However, we have two different angles because of the curve markings. One has one curve marking, the other has two, which means there are two different measurements, thus failing the corresponding angles. All right, next example. We are given 82 and 102. Think about what angle relationship it could possibly be to be able to prove our lines parallel or not. All right, so in this example, they're on the same side, so we're looking at if it's going to be SSI or same side interior. When I add them together, they are not supplementary. They give me a sum of 184 degrees. So that means my lines are not parallel. They fail the definition of SSI. All right, next example. Here we have two angles on our diagram, both 120 degrees, and we're going to determine if they meet the definition to be able to use the converse of one of our relationships. All right, so this one is yes by alternate interior converse. We have our two angles in the interior alternating on the transversal, and they are matching. So we can say those lines are parallel. All right, next example. Here we have two angles again, same value. We're determining if our lines are parallel by one of our converse theorems. Okay, so in this example, we do have parallel lines. our two angles meet the definition of corresponding, so we can say corresponding angle converse. All right, here we're giving another example. This time we are given two angles next to each other. One is 48 degrees and the other is 132 degrees. Think about the angle relationship it gives, and if that allows us to determine our lines are parallel or not. Right, so this situation does not. Linear pairs does not help us prove lines parallel whatsoever. You can see that my information is stuck on one line and not the other, so it really doesn't help us determine lines parallel or not. So the answer is no. Right here we have another example. Our angle pair that we are given to determine is 85 degrees and 95 degrees. All right, so you can see we have the two angles on the exterior, but there are two different numbers and they're alternating. So that means that they fail the definition of alternating exterior angles. So our lines are not parallel. All right, next example. All right, so with this example, we have two angles given 180 right off the bat. It looks like they do not have a relationship, so be mindful of that. Remember, we can move things around a little bit. The only way we can is by vertical angles or linear pair. And the reason why we can only move that is because we don't know if the lines are parallel yet. So in this case, how I started is I moved that 100 by the vertical angle relationship, and now you can see I have the two angles, the 80 and 100, in the interior. When I add them together, it makes 180 degrees. So that means that my two lines are parallel by SSI converse. Sometimes all we have to do a little bit of work by maneuvering our angles. Again, we can only move them by vertical or linear when our lines are not identified as parallel or not. All right, here's our next example. We're given two angles. We can tell that they are congruent by their curve markings. And then we need to determine if the lines are parallel or not. All right, in this case, we have vertical angles, and vertical angles do not help us prove lines parallel. We can't relocate any more information. That's all we have. So it's not enough information to tell if the two lines are parallel or not. So again, vertical angles and linear pair does not really help me prove my lines parallel. Right, next example. Here we're given two angles. Notice the curve markings, which means that they are two different values. Right off the bat, we can see that they do not have a relationship. So again, we can move things around by using vertical or linear pair relationships. All right, so the first thing I did was I moved that angle. I highlighted in red, and that is moved by vertical angle. And then I'm telling you that we cannot prove the lines parallel because we don't know the measure of the one curve marking to the two curve markings. Even though we want to say it looks like it's supplementary, we are not 100% sure. So we're going to say that this is not enough information to prove the lines parallel. All right, and here's our last example. We're given two angles. One is 85 degrees and one is 95 degrees. Is this enough information to determine the lines parallel or not? All right, so in this example, the first thing I do is I'm going to take those two angle measures and I'm thinking that they should be SSI. So I want to check if they are supplementary. And when I do, they make 180 degrees. So I can say, yes, they fall on the same side of the transversal. They make that 180 degrees when I add them. So this is yes by SSI. All right, so that's it for our practice. Hope you got some good information out of it. Talk to you guys soon.